We are exploring the vast concepts of space and time and existence in Buddhist cosmology. This ancient world is fascinating because it differs radically from our modern scientific perspective. Every Buddhist or meditator should understand these concepts. Often the Dhamma is presented in a dry or sterile form in the suttas, and still, even with the modern spin that teachers have today, or the style, sometimes we're still removing the cosmology because some teachers worry that it might unsettle the contemporary mind. But Buddhism has its intention of coming to terms with stark realities and comprehending them, because it's necessary for our maturity and progress toward enlightenment. Things like marana sati, right? Mindfulness of death and impermanence. So today, even astrophysicists discuss things like dimensions and parallel universes. So this makes the ancient topics and the ancient wisdom feel both rich and relevant. Now, to truly understand this Buddhist universe, you must be willing to abandon certain Western educational and social structures. Many people today are hungry for new mythos or myths and folklore. It helps us visualize. Western culture has largely lost its traditional stories. Greek myths have faded, and Christian narratives are losing their cultural grip. And, over the past few hundred years or millennia, it's already been augmented or corrupted, rather. People now flock to fictional works like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or something like that. And that's an example of our hunger for these things. People crave a rich tapestry of being and ideas of infinite space. This interest confirms a gut feeling that something more is happening in our reality. Pure logic and science often offer a flat and one-dimensional version of our life, but we occasionally catch glimpses of a deeper mystery out of the corner of our eye. And with things like, paranormal investigators who are using tools, both with the scientific means of investigating the unknown. This is when it gets interesting, of course. You set up your radios and your electromagnetic detectors, and they pick up so much activity. It's fascinating. Now, modern materialist philosophers fail to explain these kinds of moments. There is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our current philosophies. Life can feel hollow without a sense of enchantment. When people deny the magical nature of the universe, they often just check out through the media or distractions. So people of 5th century India possessed a unique gift for constructing a meaningful universe. We act more like archaeologists trying to rediscover their methods. They didn't invent this cosmology overnight through sheer imagination. It was built over many centuries, but it exists as an intrinsic reality. They just had to spread the teaching and create a teaching, write it down and spread it orally. So the Buddhist version is a snapshot of a development that began 1,000 years before the Buddha himself. Ancient Indians and Egyptians refined this system continually, like musicians tweaking, the parts of a song to find new layers of meaning, but the original knowledge has always been there. They just had different ways of explaining it, but the fundamental reality is the same. The Buddha wasn't just a passive hire to a prepackaged system. He was a critical thinker who interpreted the traditions he inherited. So, for instance, he completely reshaped the descriptions of the higher celestial realms, which is a prime example of his treatment of the deity Indra. In the older Vedic period, Indra was a fierce warrior god similar to Zeus or Thor. So he wielded a thunderbolt and was known as a destroyer of cities. The Buddhist version of this figure is known as Sakka. Sakka was basically turned into a Buddhist figure through the principle of harmlessness. One story tells of a princess captured by a yaka, which is a fierce demonic, or rather demon-like monstrous beast. These yakas are, based on the descriptions, basically like Sasquatch. And this one threatened to eat her for breakfast when she refused to marry him. So she cried out of a force of goodness to save her. Sakka carries the demon over 7 mountain ranges and releases him. So this is that catch and release approach to justice. The old Indra would have simply vaporized the demon. So even his titles were changed. A name once meaning, it used to mean terrible destroyer, became, in Buddhism, it became great giver of gifts. So this is a big conversion. Yakas they're a class of beings that appear frequently in these sources. The word can mean being in a general sense, actually, but it specifically refers to this group. They are the mythological equivalents of European orgs. And or even like cave trolls. And they're often described as fierce creatures living in the wild. So we'll encounter them often in our discussions of Buddhist cosmology, because I won't be able to explain everything in one lecture. This will be a series. The early Buddhist conception of space is entirely different from the Greek or medieval European models. The central unit is the Chakavala, or world system. There are infinite number of these systems. And at the heart of each system stands a massive peak called Mount Sineru. And in Sanskrit, it's known as Meru, or Muru, or Sumeru. So this would be pronounced more like Sineru, Meru, and Sumeru. The first one had more of an I sound, Sineru, and then the last one is Sumeru. So this mountain is 84,000 yojanas high. One yojana is approximately 15 kilometers. So if you calculate this, that would mean that the mountain is it's a bit taller than the distance between the Earth and the Moon. 7 ranges of smaller mountains surround Sineru. Each range is half the size of the one before it. So a belt of ocean So in addition to this, a belt of ocean sits between each range. And a much wider ocean exists outside the entire complex. A massive wall encloses the world system. 4 islands are located in this outer ocean at the cardinal points. Humanity lives on the southern island called Jambudvipa, and we specifically occupy only the southern half of that island, this particular humanity. Jambudvipa corresponds to the known world of ancient India. So there could be a bit more, there would be a little bit more that we occupy than just that area, in theory. So it is described as a triangular because the Indian subcontinent itself is triangular. And while the details differ, the spirit of this model is closer to modern science than the old European views. In fact, because the medieval European model placed Earth at the center of a small, finite universe, the Buddhist model allows for infinite world systems. And ancient Indians saw these systems packed very tightly together like cartwheels on a flat plane. And each of these worlds is inhabited and just teeming with life. In the 19th century, scientists would have dismissed the idea of infinite inhabited worlds as ridiculous, but now today, astrophysicists suggest the probability of extraterrestrial life to be substantially high. We are essentially converging back toward these ancient systems, or intuitions. We're moving away from the egocentric idea that humans are the center of the universe. What we're realizing instead is that we are inhabiting a very inconceivably small sliver of a pie or small neighborhood in what is really a truly vast, expansive, and crowded ocean of existence with many layers to it, many depths. In this early Buddhist vision, humanity doesn't occupy anything resembling a central or privileged position in the universe. Our specific island of Jambudvipa is a mere speck within the staggering scale of the total world system of Chakavala. If an artist were to draw this entire system strictly to scale, the great central mountain known as Mount Sineru would dominate the entire canvas. The 4 great islands would appear only as tiny, almost insignificant dots tucked into the far corners of the salt ocean. So we must realize that we live on just half of one of those specks. We barely occupy a speck. Now, higher classes of devas and beings, they occupy the lush slopes and the radiant peak of the central mountain instead. We reside in a physically minor and peripheral part of the cosmos. So this perspective is designed to set a specific background mood for our culture. And as practitioners, it radically shifts how a civilization perceives its own place in the grand scheme of things. Even if the daily chores of life, like plowing fields or chopping wood, would remain the same, the physiological landscape is permanently altered by this sense of vastness. Time is another area where ancient Indian thought offers a mind-disturbing departure from Western tradition. Pre-modern Europeans largely operated under the belief that the world was only about 6,000 years old. But in sharp contrast, the Buddha spoke of eons known as kappas or kalpas. And these are again, very vast, inconceivable stretches of time that cannot easily be measured in standard years. So this vision extends infinitely into the distant past and the unending future, or the primordial past. We're dealing with great cosmic days here, where you will see, 7 root races emerge and decay, evolve and devolve. These manvantaras, one of which, so one root race being, our Homo sapien species. And we haven't even lasted very long so far. So individual world systems have finite lifespans, but the universe as a whole continues in a state of perpetual flux. As old systems are eventually destroyed, new ones arise to take their place in an eternal cycle of cosmic birth and death. So contemporary astrophysics currently debates whether there is an infinite space and series of sequential universes, or just one solitary Big Bang. In the Buddhist model, the specific force that generates a new universe is the collective karma of beings from the previous system. And if beings are not fully enlightened, they still possess outstanding karma that necessitates future rebirths. There's no physical place for them to appear unless a new universe is generated to facilitate their existence. So this concept effectively hooks the material world into a moral and intentional universe. It suggests that the meaning and actions found in life are the primary features of reality itself. The physical world is simply the frame or the stage provided for that meaning to unfold. And when we turn our attention to the concept of being, we encounter multiple layers of consciousness and existence. These descriptions are so rich and varied that they make modern views of life seem deprived of in comparison. One broad way to classify these beings is through 3 distinct planes of existence. These are the plane of sense desire, the plane of form, and the plane of the formless. So the plane of the sense desire, or kamaloka, is the most diverse and complex level of the universe. It includes human beings and animals and the subterranean, the hells, hungry ghosts, and the lower celestial gods, or the devas, the demigods. They're lower than the gods themselves. They're higher in frequency. They are in the heavens, but they're form heavens. They're just above our level. And so all the beings at this level are, in some sense, physical or concrete, and they are in form. And the primary distinction or quality is that they relate to the universe and perceive it through the 5 senses. That's what makes them this way. So their thoughts and motivations and desires center entirely around the input of sight and sound and touch, tactile sensations, scent. So this level is also the furthest away from enlightenment because it's caught in so many layers of sensory distraction. Now, the second major level is the realm of form, or the rupa loka. Okay, so this is another level of form, but it's higher. This is known as the Brahma gods, or it's the home of the Brahma gods, who represent a much higher a level of existence. As I said, it's the beginning of heaven, the form heavens. These beings have physical bodies, but they've completely transcended the pole of sensual life. So they are not crude, and they don't have animalistic traits. They're civilized. They don't have the animal ego. They're not divided into genders because the biological needs of male and female don't exist there, generally speaking. They don't eat physical food as much like we do. At least according to the suttas. I mean, there are still further sub-levels of this, or subcategories, where, there are exceptions. But in the suttas, instead, they feed on internally generated bliss and radiant energy. They are largely self-contained and exist in a state of high vibration. All of them are in samadhi. But they are still subject, of course, to their own level of defilements of the mind. So there is no animal ego. Sometimes we say, in a certain context, we say they don't have ego. But of course, they are still within samsara. And any realm that's in samsara is a cyclic realm. It's just subtler. So they may still exist with some level of pride, especially the demigods, the devas. We call them the jealous gods, right? That's one translation. And many of them have attachment to attachment to their celestial rests, to their bliss and their palaces. They might feel a sense of superiority because of their higher status. Now, the third and highest primary level is the realm of the formless, or arupa loka. This is a fascinating state where beings consist of mind and consciousness only. They don't possess physical form or material attributes whatsoever. You can visualize these levels using a bullseye model with unconditioned perfection at the center. The formless realm represents existence at its bare minimum. And as you move further away from the center, you take on more complications and physical density. The bodily element becomes coarser and more prominent as you descend. And this brings with it all the complex ailments and limitations associated with physical biology. Things like gravity and decay, birth, age, sickness, and death. It's difficult for us to even conceive of a mind-only existence. We are so, while we're trapped in these bodies, we're enormously influenced and used to having a body. It's a vehicle. We have to be in some kind of body, otherwise it's hard to imagine existing without form. Maybe it's like watching TV or existing in a movie, being the camera, just floating around, seeing things, but not really feeling or walking, something like that. Trapped in these lumbering physical frames. Modern physicists sometimes suggest that the ultimate reality of the universe is actually information rather than matter. I think the more appropriate word is actually consciousness. And this mirrors the ancient idea of a non-material realm governed entirely through thoughts and mental processes. And of course, we know in cosmology and in the occult that these are simply planes of mind. These are worlds or dimensions where certain aspects of the mind are the most prominent. A dimension where there is only thought and concepts would be the mental plane. So this cosmology isn't intended to be a collection of abstract or dry theories for academic debate. That's certainly not. Buddhist scripture has never been intended for debate or interpretation. It is meant to be emotionally transformative and informative, helpful for our internal psychology, a map, a guideline, to be practically used and fully understood without question. So we must ask ourselves how we can use this knowledge for the greater joy and comprehension. Contemplating the Brahma realms is actually a very practical tool for daily meditation. The specific consciousness of a Brahma god is the exact equivalent of the jhanas. So these are basically one and the same. The Brahmas live in the jhanas. And as I've explained, the jhanas there are 4 primary jhanas. These are the deep states of meditative absorption that lead us to samadhi, the perception of reality. These are high, superhuman, true human conscious states of mind. And you can experience these in your own consciousness with enough practice, but the jhanas are very challenging to attain. They do take a lot of practice and a good amount of energy too, energy cultivation. But you can learn to notice this whenever your thoughts are relating to the sense realm, and you can choose to transcend the senses through this practice. It requires a concentration, usually on a subject, to help you focus, and you go deeper and deeper into that concentration so that you can transcend the physical and even go beyond these other senses that we're so used to entertaining. Once you're beyond the physical, then there is mental perception that you must go beyond as well, right? You have to go beyond your thoughts. You have to stop thinking. You have to go beyond your emotions. You have to stop getting so feeling strong emotions. When you practice this meditation, you want to go past your emotions too. You don't want to have any strong feelings. You want to just be very serene and neutral to enter these states. So physical discomfort, stiffness, or coldness are simply sensory experiences that occur within the kamaloka. By regarding these sensations as irrelevant to this practice, you can start to transcend it. And these are not mythological stories. They're not meant for entertainment, that's for sure. These are religious scriptures. They have a purpose. They have a use. They're very important. You do have the option to experience these realms of joy, these levels of rapture and bliss and loving kindness, because the jhanas are not actually mandatory in this practice. Only samadhi is, because that's part of right concentration. So we want to make this ancient universe feel alive and vibrant today and relevant. We are interested in entertaining a reality with different priorities to help our spiritual practice. There are amazing realms closer to Earth that feel half apparent to our senses if we're quiet enough to notice. The lowest of the heaven realms is the realm of the 4 great kings, in fact. This is the first of the 6 heavens, characterized by sense desire. And this one is located halfway up the slopes of the mighty Mount Sineru. The 4 kings serve as the guardians and lords of the 4 cardinal directions of our world system. They're known as Datarata in the east, Viruhaka in the south, Virupaka in the west, and Vasawana in the north. So they serve as the king of the gods, or they serve the king of the gods who live on the very peak of the mountain. They also face toward the earth and oversee many of the lesser classes of beings. Their realm includes very diverse creatures like the yakas and nagas, which are these are the basically energy serpents, or the water serpents, the divine water serpents, as well as supanas and kinnaras. And these kings usually have human-like forms, but they're described as being incredibly large in their natural state. They're said to be, so the scale is completely different than ours, right? The proportions might be the same or very similar, but they're 10 kilometers in size when they are in their own celestial home. And yet they can manifest to us and appear like one of us, much smaller, more relatable forms when they interact with human beings in the historical stories. And I guess this could be because there's a theory, or maybe it's written somewhere, that I'm not sure if it is written, but basically, for the most part, beings cannot perceive. Most beings can't perceive other beings that are of a higher nature. There are some exceptions. Animals have some perception of us. They can definitely see us. And yet because animals and humans are actually, on Earth at least, more or less the same thing. We're animals, mammals, we're physical. But once you go beyond the physical world, it gets harder and harder for beings like us to perceive higher, more advanced creatures and people. And so, of course, when we do see them, we're usually in some higher state anyway, some higher state of consciousness. It requires that conscious shift. But when we're not in jhana or the samadhi, then it's necessary and a good idea for these Brahmas to show up in a relatable form, to look like one of us, or something that we can see and touch and feel, and something that's not 10 kilometers taller than you, so that you can see it face to face. Now, beyond the realm of these kings, the universe expands into even higher heavens of the sense realm. Above the 4 great kings lies the heaven of the 33, or Tavatimsa. This is located on the flat summit of Mount Sineru itself. It's presided over by Saka, the essentially ordained warrior god Indra. And this heaven serves as a hub for the gods. It's often visited by the Buddha in various legends. Above the mountain peak, the heavens are no longer tied to the physical geography of the world system. They float in space above the mountain like vast celestial cities. And these include the Yama heaven, the Tusita heaven, where future Brahmas and Buddhas reside, the Mina Narati heaven, and the Parani Mita Vasavati heaven. Each of these realms has its own unique lifespan and quality of pleasure. As you go higher, the light becomes more radiant, and the lifespans increase by millions of years. The devas, for example, I think that I can't remember if it's the devas or the gods, the demigods or the gods, but at least the nirvanis, the gods, they have lifespans that are averaging in the tens of thousands. And now when we go higher, we're seeing in the millions of years. But all of these realms are still part of samsara. They are temporary. At least the beings there, their stay is temporary. They still have conditioning, mental conditioning. So even a god living for billions of years will eventually exhaust their good karma and die. And then they will be reborn in another realm based on their remaining actions. This is why the Buddha emphasized that even the highest heavens are not the ultimate goal. They don't ultimately lead anywhere. They don't give you anything except a vacation, a very long vacation. So the goal is to transcend the entire system of existence, of death and rebirth altogether, that cyclic existence. The structure of the universe also includes various lower realms. Beneath the human world and the great salt ocean lie the realms of suffering. So these include the animal kingdom. They begin at the animal level. Then the pretas or petas, or hungry ghosts. And then the hell realms, or nirayas, naraka in Sanskrit. But none of these places are permanent. They're not permanent places of eternal damnation. That is a Christian concept taken literally, because in the Bible it says there's eternal damnation, when really, if you're Gnostic, you understand that to mean it's just an exaggeration of the term. Eternal just means a very long time. It's not actually eternal. These are all temporary worlds where beings work out they have to carry the burden of the results of unwholesome action. The hungry ghosts are depicted with tiny necks and enormous bellies to symbolize insatiable desire. But there is a literal aspect to this too. The hell realms are, the hungry ghosts have all sorts of grotesque, disturbing, mutated forms because of their karma, and it's all a direct proportion to your actions and things like that. So it's not far from reality at all. The small neck and the large belly appearance. The hell realms are described in very vibrant detail to serve as a deterrent for unskillful behavior. So the concept of world systems also implies that there are many Earths out there, or inhabited planets. Each chakala has its own 4 islands, and its own human population. I should say world system. So there's more than one Chakayala, each with the 4 islands. Some of the islands are described as being much more pleasant than ours. For example, the northern island of Utaraku is a place where people live for 1,000 years and they don't have any private property. Our island of Jambudvipa is considered special though, because it is the island of the rose apple. And this is known as the place where Buddhas are born. And while it's a realm of much suffering and struggle, it's important that it's like this. It's still mild, and it just enough so that it provides the perfect balance between pain and pleasure. And this allows beings to comprehend the necessity toward liberation they have to understand suffering to be motivated to change. They have to know impermanence, or rather they have to know the noble truth of suffering, that suffering persists. And yet they have to have enough of a quality of life that they can get by. They can get by without being overwhelmed. They can just live their lives normally, and they can perform the work. So it's a very good place to work. It's one of the best places, actually, is the physical world. A physical world with the right circumstances to work, where the suffering is not too great and the pleasure is not too great, is perfect. The perfect grounds for this work. And we're living in a time where science is finally catching up to these ancient determinations and concepts of populated and infinite universes, multidimensional planes. We're realizing that we are just one tiny neighborhood in a crowded and inconceivably large ocean of being. And we're not alone. Our actions have consequences that ripple across these many planes. They ripple through these layers. So we have to look past the dry facts of modern life to find that enchantment and to find the real meaning of what the ancients understood so well. This universe is alive, and it is a moral universe, and it's waiting for us to explore its depths with a clear and meditative mind. It's not just about learning geography or history. It's about discovering the potential of our own consciousness. Now, more advanced beings in this cosmos possess the ability to control their shape and form, so they can appear in various guises that are more understandable to those who visit, or rather those who they visit. So it's much like a brilliant scientist presenting a very complicated idea or concept, explaining that to a class of children. They have to simplify it, put it in a form that's understandable. So the gods will often assume various forms. They will take on a form if they didn't have one. The really high gods, they will take on a form if they don't have one, so that we understand it. Or they will assume a grosser form, a coarser one, and manifest more like just everyday people. All of us have had experiences of actually walking and talking with divinity, with the gods, and we had no idea about this. Your own Tathagata, your inner Atman and your inner Tara, you've interacted with them and they have spoken with you and helped you out many times in your dreams, and we have no idea who these people are. Sometimes we're left with a feeling of familiarity, like we've known these people for a very long time. It's because usually it's our father or mother, our divine father or mother. And other nirvanas, other gods we have met and we've come across, they've helped us, we've seen them around, and we had no idea. Because to us, they tend to just look like everyday people. And it gets kind of weird, but same thing with extraterrestrials. All of us had some interactions with extraterrestrials. Sometimes they're mistaken for egos because they behave so strangely, but again, they look like just everyday people, but you can tell they're ET because there are many worldly things that they don't really understand. They're not used to, how to perform certain tasks and jobs that they've taken on, or tasks. They don't really know how to properly do it, or their languages and behavior is different They have some strange ways of communicating sometimes. So we've come across those too. They're everywhere in our astral towns and cities. But we usually just see them as people. So this allows for interactions with, multitudes of different creatures dwelling on Earth. And as well as Mount Sineru, who came perhaps from Mount Sineru, such as the Nagas as well, these dragon-like serpent beings, or the yakas, the fierce ogre-like creatures. If a modern person, if you were to compare that with, if we were to see a yaka manifest physically or when we see them in traditional art, they're often depicted with ferocious dog-like faces and large canine teeth. We can see this in Thai, I believe it's Thai, it's a lot of sculptures. And so, but based on the descriptions, they also sound a lot like, Sasquatches or Yetis. There are also Kinaras, which are curious forest dwellers, whose name literally asks the question, is it human? That's what their name means. It's a question. Is it human? And I think these are probably something similar to the undines and the gnomes. If they're curious and also said to be harmless forest-dwelling beings, I mean, actually, come to think of it, if these forest-dwelling harmless creatures, they must be elementals of some sort, right? Various simple elementals or simple angels or Buddhas. So similar to harmless fairies or pixies, sylphs, many names for this in Western folklore. And they're known for pairing up with each other for life. Their love is very deep. So, at least in the suttas, it's described this way, that they pine away if separated from their partner. So they will die if you separate them. In this realistic and uninhibited cosmology, there are also kumbhandas, or kumbhandas, plural, minor deities characterized by enormous testicles, which they use as their seats, or they have to carry these over their shoulders when they're moving around. To me, that sounds a lot like a hungry ghost. They have all sorts of grotesque forms, and it's a burden. Their forms are a burden. But these are not hungry ghosts by definition, according to the suttas. Now, while the early 20th century scholars occasionally censored these details, the ancient vision remains graphic and realistic, sometimes a body reflection of life. And there is also the bird realm, dominated by the supanas. And these are gigantic creatures with wingspans stretching hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometers. And they're powerful enough to trigger hurricanes with a single flap of their wings. They're the eternal rivals of the Nagas, actually, so upon whom they feed. This cosmic rivalry is mirrored in our animal realm by the struggle between the eagle and the cobra. So, while a modern Westerner might view these as stories, the Buddhist perspective suggests that these animals may be lesser versions of those higher beings carrying their ancient wars into the physical world. Now, the ocean also contains just absolutely immense life. There are descriptions of creatures thousands of miles long, which seem impossible to us and to our imagination until you consider some other kinds of forms of life that you might call individual, and these are groups or schools of life forms, right? Flocks of birds, schools of fish, and coral reefs. These are all things that we have physically that are in the form of one great intelligence or mass. Because if you've ever seen a really magnificent flock of birds, a swarm of birds, not just crows, but I mean those little ones that move in waves all together, or what was the other example? A school of fish, right? It looks like one giant organism, and it's moving in this organic and incredible wave. So there is a collective consciousness happening there. Otherwise, they'd be scattered. They're moving together. So there's this singular, vividly alive entity, hundreds of miles long, in these stories. Ancient people perceived these groups not just as individuals. So, if you reclaim this view of the world as a living garden, rather than just a scripture, we can actually begin to heal our modern sense of alienation and loneliness, because truly we're never alone when we recognize the experience of other beings and how similar we all are from one another. With 8 billion people as part of the same species, you can always count on the fact that there are many people who are going through what you're going through, or who understand what your problems are like and have the same problems. Because it's pretty hard to be unique and special in this world, honestly, with 8 billion people. And not just in terms of uniqueness, but in terms of being alone or isolated. I mean, you can't really get away from the creatures and organisms here. There are living creatures everywhere and in other dimensions. So we must move with respect as well. Beings like the Nagas are beneficent and but proud. So if they're offended, they can become quite destructive. Now, as we move higher up Mount Sineru, we leave the earthly realms behind and enter the Tavatimsa, the heaven of the 33. And this realm, located at the mountain's peak, is ruled by the Council of Gods, led by Sakha. And in this world system, Sakha serves as a governor or overlord. And he's a benevolent kind of kind of Buddhist or Buddha, more so. He's not really the thunderbolt Indra. But he's not a creator, and he's fully aware that higher realms exist above him. So this pantheon shares characteristics with the gods of Greek and Norse myths, and they occasionally intervene in human affairs. So Ka sometimes manifests in the human form on Earth, and occasionally out of a selfish concern that a human ascetic might gain enough merit to replace him. But in this system, no being is immortal, and Saka is rather a title for an office rather than a permanent identity. So when his lifespan ends, a new being arises to take that position. And Saka is surrounded by a vast retinue, including the apsaras, the celestial dancers, and the gandhabas, the heavenly musicians and harpers. And these dancers and harpers are essentially, these are just various gods or devas. And to clarify, I did accidentally I misused the word deva to mean demigod, but actually deva is a general term for gods. And then the asura is the term for the demigods. But these higher celestial beings reside in vimanas, which are often that's translated as mansions. Oh, sorry. So not vimanas as a word singular, vimanas plural, and these are mobile mansions. They float in the akash, in the ethereal space, in the heavens. I believe it's more or less the same thing. It's somewhere in the atmosphere there is the akash, which has the information, the library of information, the data of all of history. But basically they float in heaven, in that atmosphere. These are palaces. And some people suggest that modern UFO sightings might be interpreted as these divine dwellings. In some respect, they are, because many extraterrestrials are at the god level. They have evolved enough that, they belong to nirvana. They really do. They have very little conditioning, and some of these entities, some of these beings have solar bodies, so they have performed the sexual work to create the soul to live up in the higher heavens as opposed to the lower simple heavens on Earth. The elemental, gnome heavens, which is Garden of Eden. So they technically are one and the same sometimes, these aliens and UFOs, these extraterrestrials. They are various gods. Now, even the sun and moon are considered vimanas. They're inhabited by very specific gods. There's Surya Deva, for instance, and he is the chief of the sun's inhabitants. And while the sun itself is a location of consciousness rather than a conscious being, it is still a conscious being, but it's more referred to a place or a state of mind in the suttas. We maintain a deep heart connection to it. When we reduce the sun to a nuclear ball in the sky, we lose the childlike wonder and abundance that connects us to the outer universe, because truly the sun is a magnificent Christic or a Krishnaic force. That pure light of Christ and of Krishna is coming from the sun. It is a magnificent being. Every planet is a being, and our solar system is governed by this sun. The sun is responsible for liberation, and the sun gives us energy. We absorb the solar rays from the sun, and that recharges our vital bodies.